Tell me when you're ready.
Okay. Okay, so this is my exhibition project, 2018. Okay, so the topic that I'm going to be talking about with you today is Islamophobia. The main points that I'm going to be talking about is, well, what is Islamophobia? How is it spread? Why does it exist? And then I'm going to talk about some examples of hate and discrimination towards Muslims. So first, well, what is Islamophobia? Essentially, it's the fear of Muslims or Islam, the fear of the teachings of the Quran, the fear of the practice of Islam, and the fear of Muslim people. So Islamophobia is shown through discrimination. Some different forms of discrimination are hate crimes, harassment, and anti-Muslim organizations, which I will talk about a little bit later in my presentation. So how is this hate towards Muslims spread? There's one main source of this hate, which is the media, the way that the media portrays Muslims. And then subcategories also politicians and public figures who speak in hateful ways about Muslims. So the media. The way that the media portrays Muslims kind of purports what Islam really is, and it fuels this idea of Islamophobia. And then this causes hate crimes to happen and harassment against Muslims to happen, which then impacts the lives of Muslims. The things that the media posts about doesn't represent Islam for what it really is. So the media will post about terrorism and these radicalized Muslims, but they never show the sides of Islam where there are good people. They don't show Ibtihaj Muhammad, who is a advocate for Muslim women and Muslim women who wear the hijab, Mona Haidar, and Linda Sarsour, who is actually the co-founder for the Women's March on Washington. But these people are not really getting recognition for what they're doing. And when only terroristic people and these radical Muslims are being portrayed in the media the way that they are, people are fearing Muslims, and this is what Islamophobia is. But then also in the media, Muslims are the only people who are actually called terrorists. So people go around killing, and they're committing these terrible acts, killing people and harassing people, and they're claiming to be Muslim and doing this in the name of Islam and in the name of the Quran. But when somebody else commits a crime, say there's somebody who is white or somebody else who doesn't identify as Muslim, they're not going to be called a terrorist because that's just not what the media does. All of the school shooters or the recent attacks that have happened, those people were terrorists. There was no source that shows that they were really mentally ill, but that's how other people are portrayed in the media, as mentally ill. So now going to politicians. So there are very many politicians and public figures who have spread hateful messages about Islam and who have made demonizing statements. And I found many quotes from different politicians from a documentary that I watched called Islamophobia in America. So first we have our President Donald Trump, who has made, he's a very avid Twitter user who spreads hateful messages through that platform. He's also said that Islam hates us, not specifying what us means, but then there's also Ben Carson, who's the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the United States. And during his when he was running for president, he actually he gained a very large following after making hateful statements towards Muslims and saying that a Muslim should never be the president of the United States under any circumstances, even though it says nowhere in the Constitution that there are no religious requirements. Then there's also Michael Flynn, who is the former U.S. Army Lieutenant General and the former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. So he has actually said in some of his speeches and interviews that he's had that Islam is like a cancer and that it is a political ideology. And so when these politicians and these public figures are spreading these hateful messages, their supporters are impacted by this, and then it's put into their minds that this is true, what they're saying is true, and then that's also how Islamophobia is spread. Another person, Trump's deputy assistant named Sebastian Gorka, has said that violence is a fundamental part of Islam. And then Stephen Bannon, who is the former White House chief strategist, who has said that Islam is not a religion of peace, it is a religion of violence. So these people, it's clear that they don't really know much about what Islam really is. They just use what they see in the media and what's going on in the world to kind of assume these bad things about Muslims. So when I was doing my research, I found many anti-Muslim organizations, one called Britain First, which is in the UK, and Donald Trump was actually retweeting tweets from this organization spreading hateful messages about Muslims. This organization called American Freedom Defense Initiative, who is actually pro within the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. They are in support of the Israelis attacking and harassing the Palestinians. And then there's also this one called BEAR, or the Bureau on American Islamic Relations, which is kind of the opposite of the Council on American Islamic Relations, which kind of is are advocates for Muslims and support Muslims, and I found a lot of my information from that organization. So from the years 2008 to about 2013, these organizations, many over in the United States, have received over $200 million just so that they can spread the fear of Islam and so that they can spread this hate towards Muslims. So the fact that people are donating to these organizations and wanting to spread the hate shows how Islamophobia is such a big topic in today's society. So hate crimes over the past years, especially after the 9/11 attacks, have risen dramatically. So here's a graph from 2011 to 2015, and as you can see, it's pretty much growing every year. And then here is also, the numbers are slightly different, but that's most likely because the two different sources probably have a different perspective on what is considered a hate crime versus what is considered just a bias incident. And so these numbers are very large, but these are only the hate crimes and bias incidents that are actually recorded. There's no way of recording every single one that happens, so it's most likely these numbers are a lot higher. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about something that I also found in my research. It was called Punish a Muslim Day. So there were these letters that were sent around in the UK to actually predominantly Muslim communities, but it was basically letters that were spreading hateful messages towards Muslims and saying that you would get rewards for harassing Muslims and attacking Muslims. So this is actually not talked about at all in the media. I didn't see it anywhere on big news sources. I had to actually dig in deeper and find it. I found it in a YouTube video actually. And here's the letter that was sent around. So at the top it talks about how Muslims are constantly hurting you and causing you pain and heartache, and that you should turn this around and act upon this terrorism that's happening by spreading more hate and doing these hateful actions towards Muslims. So there's no real way of actually receiving the points. It's just maybe like a game that somebody might want to play with themselves or with their friends or something. And so the acts of hate towards Muslims can go from verbally abusing a Muslim to murdering a Muslim, and then it goes to burning and bombing mosques, and then nuking Mecca was the highest amount of points that you could receive. So I didn't find very many incidents of things actually happening because of this day, but I did find in a university in Ohio, I believe, there were Muslim students who were beat up on April 3rd, and the people who beat them up claimed that it was because of this Punish a Muslim Day. So going back to Donald Trump, like I said before, he is a very avid Twitter user, and some of his tweets spread hateful messages towards Muslims. So he actually retweeted these different videos, anti-Muslim videos, about these so-called Muslims committing acts of hate. And they were originally posted by a woman named Jada Franson, who was actually a far right-wing leader in the UK. And she, earlier this year, she was actually accused of harassing a Muslim woman and attempting to pull off her headscarf or her hijab. So the fact that he's reposting videos from this woman shows kind of his Islamophobic views. So one of the videos was a Muslim destroying the statue of the Virgin Mary. A Islamist mob pushes a teenage boy off of a building and beats him to death. And then another video was a Muslim beating up a Dutch boy who was on crutches. So these videos were posted completely out of context. He didn't explain why he posted them, he just kind of randomly posted them, and we have no knowledge of why he did so. So during his presidency, Donald Trump has also imposed a travel ban. He has said that Donald J. Trump is ordering a ban for all Muslims coming into the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what's going on. So he's banning these people who are refugees from places like Syria, a war-torn country, from Yemen, Libya, Somalia, from Iraq, Iran,